One click started a flirtation. One flight started a war. Chisholm thought she was escaping the heat of Lagos for a dream holiday with a charming Korean businessman she met on Snapchat. She expected starlit dinners and a sweet winter romance. Instead, she stepped off the plane and into the shadow of a predator. Ryung isn't just a billionaire. He's the iron-fisted heir to a global empire with a legacy written in blood and secrets. He lured her to Seoul with a smile, but now that she's in his world, the mask has slipped. He doesn't just want her company, he wants her soul. Trapped between the cold brilliance of a billionaire's penthouse and the dangerous traditions of a powerful mafia family, Chisholm must navigate a landscape where desire is a weapon and love is a liability. Ryung is a man used to getting what he wants, and he's decided that Chisholm is the only thing worth defying his bloodline for. In a city where the temperature is freezing, their chemistry is a wildfire. But when the holiday ends, will he let her go, or will his obsession make her his most beautiful prisoner? Will she survive the secrets of the Kim Empire, or will she be consumed by the man who owns the city? Hit the subscribe button if you are not yet subscribed. The humidity of Lagos was still in Chisholm's curls when she stepped off the plane, but the air in Incheon was ablaze, sharp, cold, and smelling of expensive ozone. She adjusted her wool coat, her heart hammering a rhythm she couldn't skip. For 6 months, Ryung had been a voice in her ear and a face on a 5-second snap. He was the businessman who sent her pictures of city lights and morning coffee. As she cleared customs, she scanned the crowd expecting a man in a simple suit. Instead, she found a wall of black-clad men. At the center stood Ryung. He was taller than he looked on screen, his presence sucking the air out of the terminal. His overcoat was tailored perfection, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Chisholm," he said. The way he spoke her name wasn't a greeting, it was a claim. "You look different," she managed, her breath hitching as he stepped into her personal space. The scent of sandalwood and winter air rolled off him. "The screen doesn't do justice to reality," Ryung replied, his voice a low vibration. He didn't offer a handshake. Instead, his hand found the small of her back, a dominant heat that seeped through her layers. "Welcome to Seoul. Everything you thought you knew about me is about to change." Before she could ask what he meant, 2 of the men grabbed her luggage with military precision. Ryung led her toward a waiting black limousine that looked armored. This wasn't a holiday pickup. It was an extraction. As the door closed, sealing them in leather-scented silence, Chisholm realized the man she'd been chatting with didn't exist. The man sitting next to her was something much more dangerous. The penthouse was a cathedral of glass overlooking the Han River. It was minimalist, cold, and screamed of old money and new power. Chisholm stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the snow begin to dust the city of Seoul below. "Drink," Ryung's voice startled her. He had shed his coat, revealing a charcoal silk shirt with sleeves rolled up to expose forearms that looked like they belonged to a fighter, not an executive. "Who are you, Ryung?" she asked, turning to face him. The man on Snapchat didn't have a security detail that looked like a private army. Ryung swirled a dark amber liquid in a crystal glass. "The man on your phone was a luxury I allowed myself. The man in this room is the CEO of HEIR Holdings, and to some," he paused, his gaze darkening, "the head of a family that keeps this city running." "The Mafia," she whispered, the word heavy in the air. He didn't deny it. He walked toward her, his movements fluid and predatory. He stopped inches away, his shadow looming over her. "I invited you here because I wanted one thing in my life that wasn't a calculation, but now that you're here, I realize my mistake." He reached out, his thumb grazing her lower lip. The touch was electric, a spark of pure hunger that contradicted his cold words. "What mistake?" she breathed. "I thought I could let you go after the holidays," he murmured, leaning down until his lips were a breath away from hers. "But looking at you in my space, under my lights, I don't think I'm capable of letting you leave." Dinner was a silent, opulent affair. Ryung watched Chisholm across the mahogany table, his eyes never leaving her. She moved with a grace that felt like a challenge to the sterile perfection of his home. "My family expects me at the ancestral estate tomorrow," Ryung said, breaking the silence. "It is the winter solstice, a time for tradition, and for my father to remind me of my duties." "And what are those duties?" Chisholm asked, setting her glass down. "To marry a woman chosen by the board, to secure the bloodline, to remain untouchable." He stood up and walked to her side of the table, pulling her chair out. He didn't help her up. He waited for her to rise into him. Chisholm felt the heat of him, the sheer gravity of his presence. "I'm a disruption to that, aren't I? A woman from Lagos, a stranger you met online. Why am I really here, Ryung?" He gripped her waist, pulling her flush against his hard frame. The friction of her dress against his suit sent a jolt of desire through her. "You are here because you are the only person who doesn't fear me, and because I am obsessed with the way you look at me, as if I'm just a man." "Are you?" she challenged, her heart racing against her ribs. "Tonight I am," he whispered. He lowered his head, his nose brushing against the curve of her neck. He inhaled deeply, his grip tightening. "But tomorrow, when we enter my father's house, you must be more than a guest. You must be mine, entirely." The drive to the countryside was silent and tense. The limousine wound through snow-covered pines toward a sprawling estate that looked like a fortress. This was the seat of the Kim family power. "Remember," Ryung said, his voice hard as flint, "do not apologize for being here. Do not look away. My mother will try to dissect you with a look. My father will try to buy your exit." Chisholm straightened her spine, her Nigerian pride flaring. "I've handled Lagos sharks, Ryung. I can handle a few billionaires in a forest." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, the first genuine expression she'd seen. "That is why I chose you." The heavy oak doors opened to a hall filled with the scent of incense and ancient wood. At the end of the hall sat an elderly man with eyes like polished stones. Beside him, a woman in a sharp, traditional hanbok watched them with icy disdain. "You bring a stranger into our sacred season." The father's voice boomed, echoing off the high ceilings. Ryung didn't flinch. He took Chisholm's hand, his fingers interlacing with hers, a public declaration of war against his own blood. "She is not a stranger. She is the woman who has my attention. And in this family, what I give my attention to, I keep." The tension in the room was suffocating. Chisholm felt the weight of 1,000 years of tradition pressing down on her, but the heat of Ryung's hand kept her grounded. The battle lines were drawn. That night they were assigned separate quarters in the wing of the estate, but as the clock struck midnight, Chisholm's door slid open. Ryung stood in the shadows, his shirt unbuttoned, his hair disheveled. He looked like a man who had been fighting a war with himself. "I can't stay in that room," he rasping, stepping inside. "Your father—" "My father is irrelevant when I'm losing my mind," Ryung interrupted. He crossed the room in 3 strides, pinning her against the wall. The darkness of the room amplified the sound of their breathing. "They spent all night telling me why you don't belong here, why you are a distraction." "Maybe I am," Chisholm whispered, her hands finding his chest, feeling the frantic thrum of his heart. "Then let me be distracted," he groaned. He crashed his lips onto hers, a desperate, hungry kiss that tasted of forbidden longing and winter. It wasn't the polished CEO or the calculated boss kissing her. It was a man starving for the one thing he couldn't control. His hands moved over her curves with a possessive urgency, memorizing her through the fabric of her nightgown. Every touch was an unspoken promise, a shattering of the self-control he had spent a lifetime building. In the silence of the ancestral home, surrounded by enemies and ice, the heat between them was the only thing that felt real. "You're going to ruin me, Chisholm," he murmured against her skin. "Then let's be ruined together," she replied. The morning light on the estate was gray and unforgiving. Chisholm woke alone in her room, the scent of Ryung still lingering on her skin like a brand. Before she could process the intensity of the night, a sharp knock echoed. 4 maids entered, carrying a traditional Korean hanbok made of heavy, cream-colored silk. "The matron requests your presence for tea," the eldest maid said, her voice devoid of warmth. Chisholm dressed with a steady hand. She knew this was an interrogation, not an invitation. When she entered the tea room, Ryung's mother, Madame Kim, sat with posture so rigid it looked painful. She poured tea with surgical precision. "My son has a penchant for rare things," Madame Kim said, not looking up. "But rare things are often fragile. They do not survive the winter in Seoul." "I'm not as fragile as I look," Chisholm replied, taking a seat without being asked. She met the woman's icy gaze. "And I wasn't found. I was invited." "He invited a fantasy," the matron countered, setting her cup down with a sharp clack. "The reality of our world involves blood oaths and corporate mergers. There is a woman, the daughter of a rival family, who has been promised to Ryung since she was 10. You are a pebble in the gears of a massive machine, Chisholm." "Then I suggest you check your machine," Chisholm said, her Lagos fire flickering in her eyes. "Because Ryung doesn't seem to want to be a part of it anymore." The matron's eyes narrowed. For the first time, the mask of perfection slipped, revealing a flicker of genuine fear. She knew her son was changing, and she hated the woman responsible for it. Ryung was in the library, surrounded by old leather books and digital screens displaying fluctuating stock prices. He looked exhausted, the weight of 2 worlds leaning on his shoulders. When Chisholm entered, he stood immediately, his eyes scanning her for any signs of distress. "What did she say to you?" he demanded. "That I'm a pebble in your gears," Chisholm said, walking toward him. "And that there's a bride waiting in the wings. Why didn't you tell me about her, Ryung?" Ryung cursed under his breath, stepping into her space. "Because she means nothing. She is a contract, you are a choice. In your world, do you even get to make choices?" Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and his face turned to stone. "There has been a security breach at the warehouse. My father's rivals are testing the lines because they heard I brought a guest. They think I'm weak because I'm distracted." "Are you?" she whispered. He grabbed his holster from the desk, checking the weapon with a chilling familiarity. This was the Mafia boss, not the Snapchat flirt. He looked at her, his gaze intense. "I am more dangerous than I have ever been, because now I have something I actually care about losing." He kissed her hard, desperate, and tasting of copper before turning to his men. "Guard her with your lives," he barked. "If a single hair on her head is touched, I will burn the city down." The estate felt like a prison after Ryung left. The snow fell harder, burying the roads. Chisholm paced her room, the silence of the house screaming in her ears. She felt the eyes of the guards on her every time she moved. Mid-afternoon, the power flickered and died. The heating system groaned to a halt. "Stay inside, miss," one of the guards muttered at her door, his hand hovering over his radio. "What's happening?" "A technical glitch," he lied, but Chisholm saw the way his eyes darted to the perimeter fence. She wasn't a victim. She grabbed a heavy fire iron from the hearth, her heart racing. If Ryung's world was coming for her, she wouldn't meet it sitting down. She moved to the window and saw shadows moving against the white snow. They weren't Ryung's men. Suddenly the glass shattered. A flashbang grenade blinded the room with white light. Chisholm dove behind the bed, her ears ringing. Through the haze, she saw a man in a tactical mask stepping through the broken frame. He didn't want to kill her. He reached for a zip tie. "The chairman wants to speak with the distraction," the man hissed. Chisholm didn't wait. She swung the fire iron with every bit of strength she possessed, catching the man in the ribs. He wheezed, stumbling back. She didn't stay to see if he got up. She bolted into the dark hallway, the cold wind howling through the house. Chisholm ran through the labyrinthine corridors of the estate, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The house was a maze of shadows. She found herself in the traditional inner courtyard, the ice garden, where the ancient trees were encased in frozen glass. She could hear boots crunching on the snow behind her. Two men. "Nowhere to go, Lagos," one of them taunted. She pressed her back against a stone pillar, her lungs burning in the sub-zero air. Just as the shadows rounded the corner, a deafening crack echoed through the garden. The man on the left dropped. Ryung appeared from the darkness like a vengeful god, his silencer spitting fire again. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like death. He reached her in seconds, his hands shaking as he pulled her into his chest. He was covered in snow and fine droplets of blood that weren't his. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "I'm fine," she gasped, clinging to his tactical vest. "I hit one of them. I think I broke his ribs." Ryung pulled back, a dark, prideful laugh escaping his throat despite the situation. "My brave girl." He tucked her under his arm, his gun still raised. "My father sent them. He wanted to test your worthiness by seeing how you handled an abduction. He has forgotten who runs this family now." Ryung kicked open the doors to the main hall. His father and mother were sitting calmly by the fire, as if the violence outside were merely a theater performance. "She passed," the chairman said, his voice cold. "She didn't scream, she fought. Perhaps she has the spirit to carry the Kim name after all." Ryung didn't lower his weapon. He pointed it directly at the floor between his father's feet. "There will be no more tests. There will be no more contracts. If you ever threaten her again, I will dismantle Shin HWA brick by brick and leave you with nothing but the name." He turned to Chisholm, his expression softening only for her. "We are leaving now." They walked out into the blizzard, heading for the armored SUV. As the engine roared to life, the heat finally hitting Chisholm's frozen skin, she looked at Ryung. He was breathing hard, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "You chose me over them," she said softly. "I chose my life," he replied, reaching over to take her hand. "But they won't stop, Chisholm. To keep you, I have to go to war with everyone I've ever known. Are you ready for that?" Chisholm looked at the burning lights of the estate fading in the rearview mirror. "I didn't come to Seoul for a quiet holiday, Ryung. Let's show them what happens when Lagos meets the north." The drive back to the city was a blur of neon and falling snow. Ryung didn't take her back to the penthouse. Instead, they wound deep into the hills of Bukshan to a secluded, modern fortress hidden behind traditional stone walls. "My private sanctuary," Ryung muttered as the gates hissed shut behind them. "No family spies, no board members, just us." The interior was warm, smelling of cedar and expensive bourbon. Chisholm felt the adrenaline of the night finally begin to ebb, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. She turned to find Ryung watching her, his eyes tracing the line of her throat. The tactical vest was gone, but the intensity remained. "You're shaking," he said softly. He didn't wait for an answer. He walked over and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her back against his chest. "I thought I lost you back there," he whispered into her hair. "The thought of them touching you, it made me realize that I've already lost the war with myself. I'm consumed by you." Chisholm leaned her head back against his shoulder. "I'm not going anywhere, Ryung, but your father, he won't let this go." "Let him try," Ryung growled, his lips finding the sensitive spot behind her ear. "Tonight the world doesn't exist. There is no Kim legacy. There is only this." He turned her in his arms, his gaze dropping to her lips with a hunger that was no longer restrained by the walls of his family home. In this fortress, he wasn't a boss. He was a man who had finally found something worth keeping. The silence of the hideout was heavy with everything they hadn't said. Ryung poured 2 glasses of wine, but neither of them touched the liquid. The air between them felt like it was humming with an electric current. "In Lagos," Chisholm started, her voice a bit unsteady, "we have a saying about fire. You don't play with it unless you're prepared to burn." Ryung stepped closer, his shadow engulfing her. I've been burning since the first message you sent me. I've been living for the 5-second glimpses of your smile. Do you have any idea what it's like to rule a city but feel like a prisoner to a woman thousands of miles away? He reached out, his fingers tangling in her curls, tilting her head back. The dominance in his touch was tempered by a raw vulnerability. I brought you here to see if the reality matched the dream. It doesn't. It doesn't, she breathed. No, he whispered, his face inches from hers. The reality is 1,000 times more dangerous, because now that I've tasted the air you breathe, I can't go back to the cold. He kissed her then, not the frantic, desperate kiss from the garden, but a slow, possessive claim. It was the kiss of a man who was surrendering his control, piece by piece, to the woman in his arms. Chisholm met him with her own fire, her hands sliding up to his neck, pulling him closer until there was no space left between them. The bedroom was a sanctuary of silk and shadows. Outside, the Seoul wind howled, but inside, the heat was rising. Ryung's hands were everywhere, on her waist, her shoulders, tracing the curve of her hip with a reverence that made Chisholm's heart race. I want to see all of you, he murmured, his voice a low vibration against her skin. No secrets, no masks. As he moved with her, the billionaire CEO vanished. There was only the heat of his skin and the intensity of his gaze. Every touch was a question, and every breath she took was an answer. The implicit barrier between them shattered as Ryung pulled her onto the bed, his body a heavy, welcome weight. They moved together in a rhythm that felt as old as the city itself. It wasn't just lust. It was a collision of two worlds that should never have met. In the darkness, Chisholm felt his heart beating against hers, a frantic, living thing that belonged only to her in this moment. "You're mine," he gasped, his forehead resting against hers as the world narrowed down to the touch of their skin. "Lagos, soul. It doesn't matter. You are the only thing that is real." For the first time since she landed, the fear was gone. In Ryung's arms, the high-stakes game of his family felt a lifetime away. But as the snow continued to fall outside, the shadows of the Kim Empire were already moving to reclaim what they believed was theirs. Chisholm woke to the sound of a distant helicopter. The sun was reflecting off the snow, filling the room with a blinding, white light. Ryung was already up, standing by the window with a phone pressed to his ear. His back was a map of tension. "No," he snapped in Korean. "Increase the perimeter. If they move toward the hills, take them out." He hung up and turned, his expression softening instantly when he saw her. He walked back to the bed and sat on the edge, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. "The board is meeting," he said, his voice grave. "My father is moving for a vote of no confidence. He claims I'm mentally unstable because of you." "Can he do that?" Chisholm asked, sitting up and pulling the sheets to her chest. "He can try. He's using the rival bride contract as leverage. If I don't marry into the Lee family, the merger fails and the stock plummets. They are trying to starve me out, Chisholm." "Then let's give them something else to look at," she said, her eyes flashing. "You told me you run this city. Stop playing by their rules and start playing by yours." Ryung looked at her, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. "You really are a disruption, aren't you? You make me want to burn the whole world down just to see the sparks in your eyes." By noon, the hideout was a command center. Ryung's most loyal lieutenants arrived, their faces grim. Chisholm sat at the mahogany table, watching as maps of the city and digital ledgers were spread out. "If we hit their shipping lines in Incheon, we cut off the chairman's private funding," one of the men suggested. "No," Ryung said, his eyes on Chisholm. "We don't hit the money, we hit the reputation. My father prides himself on tradition. We're going to show the world that the tradition is a lie." He turned to his lead tech specialist. "Leak the files on the Lee family's offshore accounts, the ones my father was going to use to fund the merger. If the Lee family falls, the contract dies with them." "And what about the distraction?" a lieutenant asked, nodding toward Chisholm. Ryung walked over to her and rested a hand on her shoulder. It was a gesture of absolute protection. She's not the distraction, she's the partner. Tonight, we're going to a gala, the very one where they expected me to announce an engagement. You're going into the lion's den? Chisholm asked, looking up at him. We're going, Ryung corrected. And by the time the sun rises tomorrow, everyone in Seoul will know that the Kim Empire has a new queen, and she doesn't take orders from anyone. The gala was held at the Grand Hyatt, a glass jewel perched atop Namsan Mountain. Ryung had spared no expense for Chisholm's armor. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk that complemented her skin perfectly, paired with a diamond choker that felt like a cold, heavy collar of loyalty. You look like a queen, Ryung whispered as the elevator ascended. He was in a midnight black tuxedo, looking every bit the lethal aristocrat. I feel like a target, Chisholm admitted, checking her reflection. In this world they are the same thing, he replied. He took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. Stay close. Don't take a drink from anyone but me. And remember, you are the most powerful woman in this room because you have the heart of the man who owns it. The doors opened to a sea of flashbulbs and hushed whispers. The elite of Seoul froze. They had expected Ryung to arrive alone or with the demure Aries. Instead, he walked in with a striking Nigerian woman who held her head higher than any princess. The scandal was instantaneous, a ripple of shock through the room that felt like a physical wave. At the center of the ballroom stood the chairman and Madame Kim, surrounded by the Lee family. The air around them was 10 degrees colder. As Ryung and Chisholm approached, the music seemed to falter. You have a flair for the dramatic, Ryung, his father said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. But a gala is for business, not for showing off your hobbies. Chisholm is not a hobby, father, Ryung said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by the surrounding dignitaries. She is the future of Shin HWA. I suggest you get used to her face. Madame Kim stepped forward, her eyes darting to the heiress, who looked as though she wanted to vanish. You are destroying a decades-old alliance for a whim. The board will not forgive this. The board follows the winner, Ryung countered. Chisholm felt the weight of 100 judgmental stares, but she didn't flinch. She turned to the chairman, a sharp, polite smile on her lips. It's a lovely party, Chairman. It's a shame that by tomorrow, the only thing people will remember is how easily your traditions were broken. The chairman's face turned a mottled purple. The war was no longer behind closed doors. It was a public execution of the old ways. The night wore on in a blur of forced smiles and veiled threats. Ryung was pulled away by a group of insistent investors, leaving Chisholm near the balcony. She watched the snow fall over the Seoul Tower, her hand resting on the cold railing. A word, Miss Chisholm. It was the heiress Min-hee. She didn't look angry, she looked terrified. She held 2 glasses of champagne. I do not want this marriage. My father is forcing it to cover his debts. Chisholm looked at the woman, feeling a sudden pang of sympathy. Then why are you here? Because in Seoul, a daughter is a currency, Min-hee whispered. She offered a glass to Chisholm. A toast to the woman who had the courage to say no to them. Chisholm reached for the glass, but a hand clamped around her wrist like a vice. Ryung appeared out of the shadows, his face a mask of fury. He took the glass from Min-hee and sniffed it. His eyes went dark. Get out, he hissed at Min-hee. Before I forget, you are a victim in this too. He turned back to Chisholm, his grip softening but his eyes still wild. It's laced with a sedative. My father didn't want to kill you here, he wanted to embarrass you. A drunken scene to prove you don't belong. I'm done with the games, Ryung, Chisholm whispered, her heart thumping against her ribs. The opulence of the room suddenly felt suffocating. They will never stop, not until I'm gone or broken. Ryung looked around the room, at the vultures in silk and the wolves in tuxedos. He realized she was right. As long as he played their game, she was in danger. Then we stopped playing, he said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black remote. I told my tech team to wait for my signal. The Lee family's debt records, the chairman's private slush funds. They're hitting the news cycle in 5 minutes. Ryung, if you do that, the company stock. I don't care about the stock. I can rebuild a company. I can't rebuild you. He grabbed her hand and began pulling her toward the exit. The chairman saw them leaving and moved to intercept, his guards closing in. Where are you going? The old man barked. To watch your empire burn, father, Ryung said without stopping. Check your phone. You're about to be very busy with the prosecutors. They burst through the heavy doors into the cold night air, just as the first sirens began to wail in the distance. The scandal of the century had just begun. They didn't go back to the penthouse or the hideout. Ryung drove like a man possessed, weaving through the neon-lit streets of Gangnam until they reached a private hangar at a secondary airfield. Where are we going? Chisholm asked, the adrenaline finally starting to fade into a strange, calm clarity. Away from here, just for a while, Ryung said, stopping the car in front of a sleek private jet. The engines were already whining, cutting through the silence of the snowy night. I have a place in Jeju. No one knows the coordinates. We need to let the dust settle while my lawyers dismantle the board. He stopped and looked at her, the moonlight reflecting in his dark eyes. He looked stripped bare. No CEO title, no Mafia ties, just a man who had risked everything for a woman he met on a screen. I gave it all up for you tonight, he said softly. The legacy, the power, the peace. Chisholm reached up, cupping his face. You didn't give it up, Ryung. You traded it for something better. Was it worth it? He asked, a rare flicker of doubt in his voice. Chisholm leaned in, her lips brushing his. Let's go to Jeju, and I'll spend the rest of the winter showing you exactly how worth it was. The island of Jeju was a different world. Away from the suffocating concrete of Seoul, the air tasted of salt and volcanic earth. Ryung's villa was perched on a cliffside, a masterpiece of dark stone and glass overlooking the crashing black waves of the East China Sea. The world is looking for us, Chisholm said, standing on the terrace as the sun began to rise. The news was already flooded with the scandal of HEIR Holdings. Ryung stepped up behind her, wrapping a heavy cashmere throw around her shoulders. Let them look. My lawyers are holding the line, and the Lee family has already retreated into damage control. For the first time in 30 years, no one is telling me who to be. He turned her around, his hands resting on her waist. The tension that had defined his face for days had begun to melt. Here, in the quiet of the island, he looked younger, less like a king and more like a man. Is this enough? He asked. A life where we have to look over our shoulders even if it's from a palace. Chisholm looked at the horizon. I lived in Lagos, Ryung. I'm used to a world that's loud and unpredictable. As long as I'm not looking over my shoulder alone, it's enough. He kissed her then, a slow, deep promise that tasted of the sea. The stakes were still high, but for the first time they weren't fighting for survival, they were fighting for a future. 2 days into their isolation, the phone rang. It was Ryung's mother. He took the call on speaker, his hand gripping Chisholm. Your father has stepped down, Madame Kim's voice was thin, stripped of its usual steel. The board demanded a sacrifice to save the stock. He is retired to the country estate, permanently. And the merger, Ryung asked. Dead, the Lee family is in ruins. There was a long pause. He wants to know if you are coming back to take the chair. Ryung looked at Chisholm. He saw the woman who had crossed an ocean for a dream and ended up in a nightmare, yet never flinched. He saw the life they could have, one of duty and cold offices, and the life they were currently building. I'll return to stabilize the company, Ryung said firmly, but I will not be the chairman you want. I am moving the headquarters' primary operations, and I am bringing my own board, starting with my chief of cultural brand relations, Chisholm. Chisholm's eyes widened. He wasn't just keeping her, he was integrating her into the very fabric of his power. "You're insane," she whispered after he hung up. "I'm a businessman," he smiled, pulling her into his lap. "And I just realized that the best way to protect you is to make you indispensable to the world that wants to reject you." The final nights in Jeju were thick with a different kind of intensity. No longer fueled by fear or the rush of escape, their passion became a language of its own. In the master suite, with the sound of the ocean providing a rhythmic backdrop, Ryung showed her a side of himself he had hidden from everyone. He was dominant, yes, a man who took what he wanted, but with Chisholm there was a desperate tenderness. He mapped her skin as if she were a territory he was discovering for the first time, his touch lingering on every curve. "I spent my life building walls," he murmured against her skin, his breath hot and ragged. "I thought power was about how much you could keep out. I was wrong." Chisholm pulled him closer, her fingers tracing the tension in his back. "What is it about then?" "It's about what you're willing to burn down to keep someone in," he replied. The implicit heat of their connection reached its peak in the quiet of the island. There were no cameras, no guards at the door, and no expectations of legacy. Just the fire of Lagos and the soul of Korea, locked in a dance that defied every tradition Ryung had been raised to uphold. They returned to the city not as fugitives, but as victors. The black limousine pulled up to the HEIR tower, and this time, the wall of guards bowed to both of them. The boardroom was silent as Ryung walked in, Chisholm at his side. He didn't sit at the head of the table immediately. He stood by the window, looking out at the city he now truly owned. "The old ways are over," he told the assembled executives. "We are an international firm now. We will value vision over bloodlines. And for anyone who has a problem with the woman standing next to me, my office door is open for your resignation." No one moved. The power shift was absolute. Later that evening, they returned to the penthouse where it had all begun. The snow was still falling, but the glass walls no longer felt like a cage. "You did it," Chisholm said, looking at the city lights. "You broke the cycle." "We broke it," Ryung corrected. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside wasn't a traditional family heirloom but a modern ring of black gold and a vivid, uncut Nigerian emerald. "I don't want a contract, Chisholm. I want a partner. Will you stay in my world and help me finish what we started?" Chisholm looked at the ring, then at the man who had risked an empire for a feeling. She thought of the Snapchat messages, the flight across the world, and the fire she had found in the heart of a cold city. "On one condition," she said, her voice steady and full of the Lagos fire he loved. "Anything?" Ryung breathed. "We go back to Lagos for the wedding. I want to see you try to handle my uncles." Ryung laughed, a loud, genuine sound that echoed through the sterile luxury of the penthouse. "I've handled the Seoul Mafia, Chisholm. I think I can handle a Nigerian wedding." "You have no idea," she smirked, letting him slide the ring onto her finger. As they stood together against the backdrop of the Seoul winter, the high stakes of their romance had finally settled into something permanent. Ryung had claimed her, but in doing so, he had allowed her to claim him. They were a disruption, a scandal, and a miracle. The billionaire and the woman from Lagos had rewritten the rules of the game. And as Ryung pulled her into a final, possessive embrace, it was clear that the story of Chisholm and Ryung was only just beginning. Desire wasn't the problem anymore. Commitment was their greatest strength.